All right. Thanks, Brian. And thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you today. Like Brian said, the title of this talk is Ego versus Empathy: How the Stories You Tell Are Making You a Commodity. And I know there's a lot packed into that title in and of itself. So let me just pull it apart really quickly. So what I've done over the last several years is study the difference between starting a conversation, starting a presentation, whatever context we want to take this in, from a point of ego versus a point of empathy. And so I'm going to get into that difference here in just a few minutes. And then the second half of the title, of course, is how the stories you tell are making you a commodity. I talk a lot about commoditization. I have a lot of architects tell me that they feel like they're being commoditized, or they're not feeling like they're being valued the way that they should. So we put these two things together, and you might deduct that the starting point of ego versus empathy might affect the value that your clients, the value that the general public sees in the profession of architects. So that's what I want to talk about today. And as Brian has mentioned, and as has been mentioned throughout this conference this week, this is an AIA CEU program. And so we have our requisite slides here. But where I really want to start the presentation, the conversation today, is with a few questions. And the first question being, have you ever wondered why? Or maybe let's back it up a minute. Have you ever been on that feast or famine roller coaster? I know in my experience throughout the years, over 20 years working in, sometimes starting, sometimes managing, sometimes just being an employee in architecture firms across my career, that I've experienced that feast or famine roller coaster, right? We're really, really busy today, and next week, all of a sudden, we don't have any work at all. And then all of a sudden, we're back to really, really busy. And there are a lot of things that are out of our control. There are economic things and global pandemics, a lot of things that are outside of our control. But the fact remains that one of the biggest complaints from architects about the profession of architecture is that feast or famine roller coaster ride. And why is it? Why is it that that's one of the most common experiences in the profession? And then question number two is, have you ever thought about the emotional toll that comes from working with the wrong clients on the wrong types of projects? Now, again, speaking from my own career, I've been in that situation before. And I can tell you lots and lots of war stories, lots of horror stories. I can show you the scars from taking those clients, taking those projects just because we needed the work, right? If we go back to that feast or famine roller coaster ride, we were in one of the dips, right? We had taken that slow climb up that first hill and then plummeted down into the valley before we made that sharp right-hand turn into the corkscrew. We were in that valley and we didn't have much, if any, work, and we took on clients and projects that we knew that we shouldn't have. But what's the emotional toll of that? And I can tell you the story right now. Sitting at a table in 2008 with my team saying, here, listen, here's a project, and here's 7 reasons that we should not take this project. But at the same time, I know that if we don't take this project, we're going to be sitting here again on Monday morning saying, what do you want to do now? Right? And so long story short, we took on that project with all 7 of those reasons, 7 red flags, and all 7 of those red flags manifest themselves plus more over the course of that project. And we took it on because we needed the work. And what's the emotional toll of projects like that, right? It's not just the experience. My experience in that project, our experience as a collective in our firm, was that I got to know some of the worst clients, maybe the worst clients of my entire career. I got to know them very, very well over the course of that project. In fact, some of the worst human beings, as it turns out, I got to know them very well over the course of that project. But beyond that, what happens? Right? What's the emotional toll beyond that? I just got out of this terrible meeting or this terrible job site visit or whatever it was. What's the toll beyond just that meeting, beyond just that project? Well, What about that next client, that other client that you have to call right after you got out of that meeting? What about your staff? What about your family or whoever you go home to, right? What's the emotional toll throughout your life and throughout your career and throughout all of your projects when you're taking on the clients that you know you shouldn't and the projects that you know you shouldn't? And then finally, the third question has to be, have you ever been in a situation that just left you wondering, why don't people understand what I do? Why don't people understand what architects do? Why don't people value architects as a profession and architects us as the professionals in this situation, with this client or this client or this project that we're looking at right now? Why is it that architects are misunderstood, are not understood, are devalued, are commoditized? Because the reality of the situation is that we're all being commoditized. As human beings, we're being commoditized, and as professionals, we're being commoditized. And the unfortunate truth is that it's our fault. And so that's what I want to talk about today. We are all being commoditized, and it's our own fault. I know that's a lot to digest. I know that might be hard to swallow, but it is the truth. We're all being commoditized, and it's our own fault. So what I want to do today is tell you first a little bit about myself. Brian made a great introduction there, which I appreciate. But I want to give you a little bit more insight into me and my career so that you have a context for where I'm coming from. So first of all, like I mentioned a second ago, I am educated as an architect. I did work in architecture firms for 23, 25 years, something like that. Over the course of those years, I've served on at least 4 management teams, and 2 of those teams being from startup. 2 startup situations helping to start and grow and manage those firms as we went forward. In one of those firms, we actually won the acclaim of Firm of the Year after several years in business. And so I tell you that only to let you know that I've been there and I've done that. I've experienced a lot of the things that you've experienced. I've earned that experience like you've earned your own experience, but also to let you know that even though I've had some successes, and when you win Firm of the Year, that's pretty heady, right? That's some pretty high praise coming from your peers. So there have been some great successes, but at the same time, I've experienced great failures and great struggles and made lots and lots of mistakes. And going back to that example I gave you before, and sitting at that table and saying, "Listen, here's 7 reasons we shouldn't take this project," and we went ahead and took that project anyway. Looking back at that situation, hindsight being 2020, would I have done that differently? Would I have made those decisions differently? Absolutely. Would I have taken that project? Absolutely not. We would not have taken that project, hindsight being 2020. But that was one of the mistakes that I made. That was one of the mistakes that we made. And the great thing about mistakes, the great thing about failures is that it gives us an opportunity to learn, and it forces us to look at things differently and gives us the opportunity to grow and get better. And that's exactly what I've done over the course of my career, is to look at those successes, those failures, those struggles, those mistakes very critically, and ask questions like, is there a better way? Is there another way? Should we be doing things differently than we're doing them right now today? And that's what I bring to this conversation today. So been there, done that. I've learned a lot over the course of over 2 decades of doing this. And I want to share some of that with you and help you learn from my own failures and from my own mistakes. And so the way that I'd like to do this today is to tell you 4 short stories about 4 different characters, and then wrap this all together and figure out how to apply these short stories to you, your firm, and your career as an architect. So character number 1, the first character that I like to talk about in this conversation is the braggart. And you know this braggart. You've experienced this braggart before. And so in order to kind of set up this part of the conversation, I'd like to ask and tell you a little bit, another little nugget about myself, and ask you a question. My mom is one of 11. So I come, at least on her side of the family, I come from a very large family. She had 5 brothers and 5 sisters. So my question to you is, are you also from a large family, either you and your siblings or maybe one of your parents? Is there some part of your family that's a very large family? And if so, just go ahead and put in the chat box yes or I am or whatever you want to do. But let me know if you are from a large family, if you have that large family experience. And the reason I ask that is that on my mom's side of that family, being one of 11, and it looks like several of you are saying, yes, I'm from a large family. One of you with one of 14, that is a very large family, right? And so some of you at least understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about the large family. And when I talk about my mom's family and the family reunions that we have every year, being one of 11, that means that our family reunions are over 100 people. They're huge, right? Even though we're spread out literally across the globe at this point, we still have these family reunions that involve more than 100 people. And if you're part of a family, and it doesn't matter if you're a small family or a large family, you still know, I know that every single one of you have that one branch of your family tree, or that one person in your family where you show up and you go, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to talk to Uncle Lewis again this year. You've got that one person in your family that, you might love them because you're part of your family, but maybe you'd just rather not spend that much time with them. And if you're not from a big family, if you're having trouble identifying with Uncle Lewis and not wanting to talk to Uncle Lewis, the same scenario applies to a networking event, right? Think back to the last networking event that you went to. You ran into the braggart character at that event probably as well. And that braggart character, in my family story, it's Uncle Lewis, right? It's Uncle Lewis corners you and he starts talking about what's going on in his life and what he's doing. And he starts talking about those cousins that you really don't like that much anyway. And he spends the whole time talking about himself and his family and things that, man, I was really hoping to avoid this conversation. And if you can't, like I said, if you can't identify with the family version of this story, just think about a networking event that you went to and you ran into Stan from accounting or some character like that. Again, it's the same character, right? You were headed to the bar to grab a drink and you were headed off by Stan. And Stan stuck out his hand and he said, I'm Stan, who are you? What do you do? And you answer in some way, and then Stan takes over the conversation. And Stan spends the next 5 minutes or more talking all about himself and what he does and the things he's accomplished and all of these things. Stan spends the entire time talking about himself. And so because I know that you can identify with one of those characters, whether it's Uncle Lewis from the family reunion or it's Stan from accounting at the networking event, think about a situation like that that you've been involved in. Think about a situation where you've been trapped by one of those characters. Just imagine being back in that situation and think about what your brain did. What did your mind do when you were faced with that situation? Right? It was the braggart that was talking about themselves for minutes, which seemed to go on for hours, but it was really just minutes. So what did your brain do in that situation? Well, first of all, this is a no judgment zone. I'm not judging you by saying this, because it's simply human nature. It's simply human psychology. What happens to your brain in that situation, what probably happened to you in that situation, was that your brain shut down, right? Your brain turned off. It basically muted the conversation and said, how do I get out of the situation as quickly as possible and on to something else? And that's again, it's part of your survival mechanism. How do I get away from this situation that's not doing anything to help me survive? It's not doing anything to help me thrive. And in fact, I'm starting to wonder if this is an actual threat to me by taking my attention away and by taking up all of my time and by keeping me away from the bar or away from the food table or whatever it is. My brain is shutting down. Your brain probably shut down and said, how do I get out of this situation as quickly as possible? Now, if you can imagine yourself, if you remember a time where you've been in a situation like that and that's what happened to you, you might be asking, what does this have to do with architecture? What does this have to do with me being an architect? And so what I want you to do is think about the things that you say when you meet a new client or a prospective client, or think about what your website says, or think about what your proposal or your email says. Are you the braggart? When someone lands on your website, does your website say me, 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 us, 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 us? Are you the braggart? Do you spend the entire time talking about yourself? When you've made the short list, perhaps if you compete in RFPs and RFQs and you get into interview situations, did you spend the entire time talking about yourself and your firm? Did you say me, 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 or we? Because if you did, you were the braggart in that situation. If your website reads like that, you are the braggart in that situation. And so the question becomes, if you're the braggart, is the person that lands on your website, or is the selection committee, or did the selection committee, did they do what your brain did, what human nature tells us to do in that situation? Did they shut that down? Did they mute you and look for other options, or figure out, how do I get out of this and on to something else as quickly as possible? That's the real danger in that situation. Now, the next character that I'd like to talk about is the fundraiser character. It's the character of the not-for-profit or the charity situation. And so the example that I like to use in this scenario is the not-for-profit Charity Water. Maybe you've heard about them, maybe you know of them, but Charity Water was a group that was founded with the simple purpose of getting access to clean water to all corners of the globe. And so, they started with the idea, back when they started, there were something like 600 or 700 million people, or more, actually, I guess it was. It was actually a lot more than that. Now that I think about it, I apologize for that. But over 1 billion people on the globe, on the planet Earth, that don't have easy access to clean water. And so if we think about that situation, we think, well, that's something that needs to be taken care of, right? That's something that it should be easy to raise money. If we say, hey, our mission, our purpose is to bring clean water to people, well, that ought to be easy to raise money for, right? And if you look at this photograph on the screen right now, this is from an actual ad that Charity Water ran, and you can see what the situation here is. It's a woman with her two sons, I think it is, their 2 children at least, on a donkey. She's got that bucket on her head, and they've got other things that they can carry water in strapped to that donkey, and they're walking a long distance to gain access to clean water. And so obviously what they do is they fill up those containers and then they carry them back to their village. And so that's really problematic, because you have people traveling long distances. It's a security risk. In the case, if we extend this story, this is a mother. She's not a young girl in this case, but there are lots of young girls in this situation who, just simply because they're the female in their family, the female in the village, their responsibility is to go and get that clean water. And what does that do? It puts them at risk. It can present health problems for them and the people around them, but it also takes them away from the ability to be educated, right? And so there are lots of reasons that not having access to clean water is a problem. And so when Charity Water started out, they said, you know what, we're raising money so that we can help people like this woman on the screen and her children gain access to clean water. And what they found was they had trouble raising money. What they found was that even though they had celebrity endorsements and lots of celebrity endorsements, they had trouble raising money to provide funding that people like this woman on the screen could use to gain access to clean water. And it really started to be confusing for them. Why is it that we can't raise this money? It's such a worthy cause. It's such a needed cause. Why can't we raise money to help these people get clean water? And at some point, somewhere along the line, somebody had an epiphany. They said, well, what if we start telling the story of this woman on the screen? What if we start telling the story of our partners that we work with? Because the fact of the matter was that Charity Water didn't actually do anything. They didn't actually drill wells. They didn't actually give money to these villages. That wouldn't be effective. That's not what they needed. They didn't need money. They needed water. And Charity Water, like many not-for-profits, was simply, and I don't mean this to demean them in any way, but they were simply this umbrella organization that took money and figured out how to distribute it to the right places at the right time in order to put these things in action that brought clean water to these villages and to these people. And so when they started telling the story of the people, that they were helping, when they started to tell the story, let's just say, if we can translate this into the terms of architecture, to their clients, right? The end users, perhaps. And when they started telling the stories of the partners that were actually doing the work, the people that were drilling the wells that brought the water to these people, it became much more effective. And one of the famous stories they told was of a well digging outfit that was headed to a village in South America, and they were driving this big well digging rig through the jungle, and it was the rainy season. It got stuck in the mud, and you know how difficult it actually was to get the equipment there and to do this work. When they started telling stories like that, it was like flipping a switch. When they could tell the stories of the people, the end users, the clients at the end that needed the water and eventually got the water because of the work that they were doing, when they started telling the story of the struggles of everyone involved, the partners that they worked with, the people in the villages and the communities, that's when they found that it was like flipping a switch and the money started to come in. And the reason was because they started focusing on someone else's struggle. They started focusing on someone other than their organization. They started focusing on the problems that needed to be solved and eventually the results that came out of solving those problems. So just like the woman on the screen with her two children on the donkey, once her problem is solved, right? We can see the result of that. My gosh, she's not having to travel 10 miles one way every single day of her entire life with her kids in tow and a bucket on her head and all of that. All of a sudden, she can have much more impact and have a much healthier life and a much healthier life for her children in her community because there's clean water right there. When they started focusing on the problems and the solutions and especially the results that came after that, it was like flipping a switch and the money started to, no pun intended, started to pour in. And so how do we translate that story into architecture, into what you're doing to market and develop business for your firm? Well, are you focusing on yourself? Are you focusing on your practice? Are you focusing on your expertise and your profession, your professionalism? Or are you focusing on your clients and their struggle and the problems that they have and the solutions to those problems, and especially the results that come after you've helped them solve that problem? Because that's what they actually value. They actually value the results that they see after you've solved their problem. And one more quick antidote on that, or anecdote on that, is that the widget maker, and I know you don't sell widgets, but the widget maker doesn't sell widgets. The widget maker sells a solution to a problem. And what people actually value is the results that they see after they've purchased that widget, their problem is solved, and their business became more efficient, or their operations were back up and running, or whatever the situation was. The customer of the widget maker actually assigns value to the result that they see after their problem has been solved. So are you focusing on what you do, or are you focusing on someone else's struggle, the solutions to their problems, and the result that they see after you've solved their problems? And that leads me to the next question, or the next character, the next short story that I want to tell you. And I understand that I'm walking into this story, I'm walking into a lot of potential landmines. And when we think about the idea, just like the not-for-profit, the fundraiser, in order to raise money for a not-for-profit, for a charity, you have to be able to move people. And there's no other great example of that's better than the political candidate. And so what I want to do is preface this part of the conversation by saying this story is not about politics, but it is about two candidates. It's about the messaging, and it's about the ability to move people, and why candidates are or they aren't able to effectively move people. And by moving people, obviously, in the candidates world, that is to get people to vote for them. And I also understand that our audience here is international. I'm going to use an example from American politics, from the United States. I think you're all going to be able to identify with it. Fortunately or unfortunately, you know a lot about American politics, whether you're in the United States or not. So this story is it's actually the story of two candidates. And if you think back to 2016 in American politics, presidential politics, Hillary Clinton ran on the Democrat ticket against Donald Trump on the Republican ticket. And obviously it was a highly contested and even highly disputed campaign. But what I want you to do, again, this is not about politics, this is about messaging. So can you remember, think back to 2016, and what was Hillary Clinton's first campaign slogan? If you know that slogan, just go ahead and put it into the chat box. And so I see a couple of people answering right off the bat, even before the question was out of my mouth. And I know Tracy got it right out of the gate. Hillary Clinton's slogan from the very beginning was, "I'm with her." Now, it seems like a pretty good slogan, right? I'm with her. I'm with Hillary. But when we ask a question, when we're a candidate, and we ask, or when we use a slogan like "I'm with her," what does that force people to do? What does that force voters to do? When we say "I'm with her," that forces people to make a yes or no decision. Am I actually with her? Obviously, the her here is Hillary Clinton. And again, this isn't about politics. This isn't even really about the candidate. But when we're asking someone to make a yes or no decision about another human being, that opens up for a lot of questions, right? And it also allows the other side to easily drive wedges between the potential voters and that particular candidate. And I'm just going to play on some stereotypes. I'm going to play on some of the language that was used in the campaign. But if you're asking me to commit to "I'm with her," what if I don't like the pantsuits? What if I really do feel like she's too cold and too calculating when she's on stage, when she's in debates? Right? It opens up the door for me to say, well, yeah, I'm not really sure about that, because I have to either say yes or no to the idea of "I'm with her." So this campaign slogan, one of the big deficiencies here is forcing me to say yes or no. I'm with this other human being. And as we know, with human beings, there's not a perfect candidate. There wasn't in 2016. There is not in 2020. There never will be. There never has been a perfect candidate. So asking someone to identify directly with another human being and attach myself to that other human being is inherently problematic. So what if we go to the other side of the aisle? What if we go to the other ticket? Does anybody remember what Donald Trump's the Trump campaign slogan was from the very beginning in 2016, or the 2016 election? And if no one gets this, then I just quit, right? And so yeah, right away in the chat, Tracy again jumped right on that, and yes, it was "Make America Great Again." They're still using this slogan a little bit in the 2020 campaign, although it has evolved a little bit for 2020, as you would expect that it would. But in 2016, the Trump campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again." And there's a lot of genius to this particular slogan. And it also, if we start to analyze this slogan, it really helps us to understand why some of you may look and go, oh my gosh, there are some really strange alliances here under this umbrella in this campaign. Why would some of these groups voluntarily align themselves with a candidate that would seem to be 180 degrees, even polar opposite of what some of these groups who are throwing their support behind this candidate? Why is it that they would align with this candidate that seems to be so far off of what their beliefs and what they say they're about? And so if we look at a slogan like, or messaging like "Make America Great Again," what does that do? How is that different than "I'm with her"? Well, the first thing is, it's not asking us to actually identify with a candidate, is it? Make America Great Again. That's asking me to believe in something that's bigger than a candidate. It's asking me to believe in something that's bigger than myself. And if we really start to dig into "Make America Great Again," if I'm an American, what's the antithesis? What's the opposite of that particular slogan? The opposite has to be something like, I don't want America to be great, right? If we use simple logic, the opposite of this "Make America Great Again" has to be something like, I don't want America to be great, or America is not going to be great, right? And so what American would say, no, I don't want America to be great? Or what American would say, no, I don't really care if America is great. I don't, America being a great place is not on my radar. Almost no American would actually agree with that, would actually say that. And so the genius in that particular statement, in that particular slogan, is that no matter what your beliefs are, again, we're not asking you to align with a certain candidate. We are simply asking you to believe in the idea of America being great. And that's the genius behind that slogan. Like it or not, like the candidate or not, that's what's packed into this particular message. And again, this is not about politics. It's about the message itself. So what can we learn from the difference between "I'm with her" and "Make America Great Again"? Well, the first thing that we can do is that we have to, if we really want to move people, and again, that's critical, right, to political candidates to get people to vote. If we really want to move someone, if we really want to get someone to buy, if we really want someone to feel like we're the right fit for them, as our architecture firm is the right fit for them, if we want to move people, or if we flip that around and say, hey, we really need to inspire our employees, which I'm going to get to here in a minute, we need them to believe in something that's bigger than me. We need them to believe in something that's bigger than a candidate. We need them to believe in something that's bigger than themselves. And so how do we translate this, again, to your architecture firm? Think about, again, the context doesn't matter. Is it your website? Is it your social media? Is it your emails that you send out? Even if it's in a proposal, is there something in there that asks your ideal client to believe in something that's bigger than you, something that's bigger than your firm? Again, it can't be I, we, us, us. It can't be all about you. Because again, if it is, we're asking someone to believe in another human being. We're asking someone to believe in a specific firm. But can we give our ideal client something bigger to believe in? Can we give them a story that they want to be a part of. And that's the key takeaway from this story about the candidate. And so I have one final short story, one final scenario, and that's the character of the leader, the corporate leader. Maybe it's the leader of your firm. But the story I want to tell you, and some of you will recognize this person. If not, you certainly recognize the company. But the person here in the hat is Sam Walton. He's the man that founded Walmart. Sam Walton was a kid that grew up in the Depression. He came from a very depressed area of the United States, and he started a company. He started a corporation called Walmart. And he started with one store and grew it into one of the biggest, most profitable. He was one of the richest men on the planet. And Sam Walton grew this idea of giving people the ability to lead better lives, keeping prices low so that people could afford to buy the things that they needed to buy at the lowest cost possible so that they could live a better life. And Sam Walton grew that purpose, using that purpose, leveraging that purpose. He grew a company from one store to one of the biggest, most loved, actually, when he was at the helm. It was one of the most loved American corporations in history. Biggest, most profitable, best companies in the world. Now, like I said, Sam Walton always talked about giving people the lowest prices always so that they could live a better life, so that they could afford to live a better life. He believed that by doing that, he could actually raise the standard of living of his customers. And that's, anytime anything came up, anytime a conversation, there was a problem, a decision needed to be made, he always went back to that purpose, giving people the ability to lead better lives. Now, obviously, at some point, Sam had to retire and different leadership would take on Walmart. When Sam was at the helm, it was one of the most loved companies. It was one of the places that people loved to work. And it was also a company, a corporation that communities wanted to attract to them. There were communities all across the United States that wanted Walmart to come to them and build a store in their community because it was a great place to work, it was a great place to shop, and it was an actual asset to their community when Walmart built a store where they were. If you fast forward to 2009, a man named Mike Duke took over as CEO of Walmart. And this is where the lesson turns to the things that you say as a leader really matter. And it also turns to another little bit of human psychology that tells us that when someone's talking to you, and especially when they're giving you a list of things, when they're starting to talk about things in a certain order, they're actually, unless they're very, very skilled and very, very trained at this, they're actually tipping their hand and showing you what their real priorities are. Now, if you take a man like Mike Duke, who's a highly skilled, highly trained CEO in one of the most important, one of the most lucrative CEO positions in the entire world, you would think that Mike Duke would be one of those highly trained, highly skilled CEOs, and he is. But I want you to listen to the very first statement that Mike Duke made when he took over as CEO. And I'm actually going to read this to you because there's no way I'm going to try to commit this to memory. So let me just read Mike Duke's very first statement that he made as CEO of Walmart when he took over in 2009. Mike Duke said, "Walmart is very well positioned in today's economy, growing market share and returns, and is more relevant than ever. It's more relevant to its customers than ever before. Our strategy is sound. Our management is extremely capable. I am confident that we will continue to deliver value to our shareholders, increase opportunities for our over 2 million associates, or in other words, their employees, and help our 180 million customers around the world save money and live better." And if you'll notice, if I move my head out of the way, save money and live better, by that time in the Walmart history, was actually their tagline. It was actually their slogan. And so that was a derivation of when Sam Walton used to talk about lowest prices anywhere, anytime. By the time Mike Duke took over, it was save money and live better. But if we kind of take a minute to analyze Mike Duke's statement there and the way that he said it, and especially the order in which he listed those things that he believed in and that he felt that Walmart had a handle on. Remember the order in which he delivered that statement. He started first with growing market share and returns, profit, basically. And the next thing he went to after sound strategy and extremely capable management was, I'm confident that we will continue to deliver value to our shareholders. So again, he's talking about profitability. He's talking about valuing shareholders. So he started with profitability, and next, and this is just an extension, about taking care of shareholders. The third thing that he talked about was opportunities for their 2 million associates. And the fourth and final thing that he talked about was helping our 180 million customers around the world save money and live better. Remember, I said that most of the time, when someone gives you a list of things in order, they're tipping their hand as to what their priorities were. When Mike Duke took over as CEO, remember, words matter, and especially the order that you deliver those words in. When Mike Duke took over as CEO, he made it very clear in his very first statement that his priorities were first, profitability, second, shareholders, and finally and last on the list of priorities was what Sam Walton founded the company on: save money and live better. Sam Walton founded a company that the entire United States loved. All the communities in the United States wanted Walmart to come to them because it was a great place to work, a great place to shop, and it was a community asset because he'd built this corporation on the idea of lowest prices anytime, anywhere, and elevating the standard of living of their customers by giving them the lowest prices possible. Mike Duke came in and completely flipped that upside down and said, our last priority in our list here today is saving money so you can live better. The words that you say matter, and the order in which you deliver those words in matters greatly. And so if we look at the very short tenure of Mike Duke at the helm as CEO of Walmart, it is, by most accounts, the most disastrous 4 or 5, I forget how many years he was at the helm, but it was one of the most disastrous periods in Walmart history. He was focused on profitability and on shareholder value and not on the things that Sam Walton founded the firm on. And over the course of the few years that Mike Duke was at the helm, they saw more lawsuits than they'd ever seen in the history of Walmart. They were investigated by the Congress of the United States. They were the subject of the largest, at least at that time, the largest class action lawsuit for labor practices in the United States history. And they actually had, rather than communities saying, Walmart, will you please come to us and build a store here, they actually had communities protest them and keep them out in places like Denver, Colorado, and New York City. They actually had protests that kept them out, kept them from building stores in those communities because they had become such a poor corporate citizen. It was a 180-degree turn from where the corporation was when Sam Walton retired. And so the takeaway here is your focus on priorities, right? The things that you say, the words that you use, and the order in which you state those words, that you put those words, really, really matter. So what's the takeaway for you as an architect, from your architecture firm? What are you saying? What are the words that you're using? What are the words that you're using? When someone, again, your website, your emails, your proposals, whatever, how the last proposal that you sent out with a cover letter, what order did you place the things that you said? Did you put your client's priorities first, Or did you talk about your firm, your capabilities, your expertise, your depth of bench, the number of years you've been in business? Did you talk about those things first and put the things that matter to your clients most? Did you put those last? Right? The order in which you say things really, really matters. So I went through those 4 stories and I went through those 4 lessons really quickly. So you might be asking, how does this actually work? You talked about a lot of things. You talked about priorities. You talked about giving people the ability or putting people in a place to believe in something larger than you or larger than themselves. You talked about the braggarts and talking all about yourself. And you talked about highlighting the struggles and the results and the solutions. You talked about all those things, but how does all this work? How do you string all of these things together in a way that actually helps you communicate in a way that keeps you from being commoditized, that keeps you from being devalued as a professional? So the next thing that we've got to talk about is this idea. And I don't know if you've ever heard this term before. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea, technically speaking, in the terms that I'm going to use, but you are familiar with it because the last movie that you watched that you loved, the last book that your favorite book, all of these things are based on a concept called the hero's journey. So, if you're a Star Wars fan or you like The Matrix or The Hunger Games or Harry Potter or whatever, all of those stories are based on the hero's journey, right? And once I describe it, you'll be familiar with it. There's always a hero. There's a main character in the story. And so whether it's Luke Skywalker or Neo or Jason Bourne in the Bourne movies, whoever it is, there's always this central character that we'll call the hero character. Now, they may be a good hero or a villainous hero. We don't know. But for some reason, there is this main character. And oftentimes, they're a reluctant character. They're a reluctant hero. There's something that has to be done. They may not want to do it, but there's something that they have to accomplish. And there's going to be struggles along the way, right? There's in the storyline, there's going to be plot twists and there's going to be twists and turns and all of those things that there are going to be things that pop up that keep this hero character or try to keep this hero character from accomplishing the goal at the end, from being victorious in the end. So there's always a hero character that has a problem that needs to be solved. And there's always struggles on the way to solving that problem. And to me, one of the most interesting things about the hero's journey structure is that there's always a second character. And that second character is the character of the guide or the mentor. It's the Obi-Wan or the Yoda character. It's that character that's there to help that hero character through the trials and tribulations, over the roadblocks or around the roadblocks, to help that character accomplish the goals and be victorious in the end. And the reason that I'm telling you that is that when we think about these stories, when we think about all of those characters that I just laid out for you, the braggart, the fundraiser, the charity, the candidate, and the corporate leader, all of those characters, all of those stories that I told you have something in common. All of those stories were based on a hero's journey. Some of the people writing the stories got them wrong, right? In the case of Charity Water in the very beginning, they had the hero's journey wrong. They were trying to be the hero of the story rather than the mentor or guide character. And when they flipped that around, when they became the guide character or the mentor character, like I said, it was like a flip, or it was like flipping a switch. The money started rolling in where it wasn't before. When we take the idea of the political candidate, the Hillary Clinton, I'm with her, that was the perfect antithesis of the hero's journey setup. They were setting Hillary up as the hero character when she should have been set up as the guide character. In all of those stories, there was a hero's journey type scenario. And so the takeaway for that is that if you want your story, your brand story, your marketing, your business development, your proposals, what it says on your website, what you're saying in your social media, if you want your stories to resonate with the people that matter most, in this case, we'll just say your ideal client, then you cannot be the hero of your own story. You have to make them the hero of the story. You have to be the guide or the mentor character in that story. And so that's great, Jeff. Why are you using the hero's journey? Why are you talking about movies and books and things like that? I do want to point out that this is not a new construct. The idea of the hero's journey goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. But why am I using that story? Why does the hero's journey work? Why did it work back in the days of the ancient Greeks? Why does it work today in 2020? Well, it works because your brain is wired. Your brain is literally wired. The neuroscience tells us that your brain is wired to understand and to latch onto and to want to have more story. And so when we look at the human brain, there's a brain on the screen and there's a brain in my hand, and I promise it's not my brain. But when we look at the human brain, we know that it's a fascinating organ, right? It's a very powerful organ. It weighs about 3 pounds. It's about 2% of your body weight. But the thing that you really need to understand is that your brain uses the majority of the calories that you burn. There's only one exception to that. After breakfast, after lunch, after dinner, when your stomach is digesting, that's the only time in the existence of your life or during your lifetime, in your human existence, that there's another organ that burns more calories than your brain. It's your stomach when it's digesting. And so when your human brain, when the brain in your head is using 20% of the calories that you burn just to stay awake, just to keep you alive, it helps you understand that there are certain aspects of your brain that you try as hard as you can not to use, right? You're always trying to conserve calories. You're familiar with the idea of fight or flight. You learned it when you were in grade school. If the saber-toothed tiger walks in right now while I'm watching Jeff talk about ego versus empathy, what do I do? Well, the fact of the matter is that the saber-toothed tiger is probably not going to walk into your room anytime soon, but your brain is always reserving energy. It's always preserving and reserving facilities for the what if. What if it does walk in? It's probably not going to happen, but I've got to be ready. I've got to know what to do, and I've got to be able to. Otherwise, I die, right? So your brain is always reserving calories, trying to cut back on its usage as much as possible. So it helps to understand what the different parts of the brain do. If we look at this top part of the brain, that's the neocortex. That's the part of the brain where you're reading, you're writing, your arithmetic. It's where all the high-level thinking is done. That's the part of the brain that is required to use when you tell me that you're an architect. I have to turn on my neocortex to go, okay, well, what does that mean? When you say our firm has 563 combined years of experience, I have to turn on my neocortex and go, whoa, what in the world does that mean? Does that mean you have 563 interns that have been there a year? Or does it mean that you have 3 really old guys that have been there way too long? Right? When you say that we've designed more schools than anyone else, I have to use my neocortex to understand what that means. Well, when we fire up that part of our brain, it uses an inordinate amount of those calories that the brain burns. So we try really hard not to use the neocortex. If we don't have to use it, we won't. If we look at the middle part of the brain, this is the part of the brain that loves a great story. It goes right to the hero's journey. If they were to scan your brain while you were reading a great book or watching a great movie, this part of your brain here would light up like it was on fire. And then, so we combine the middle part and this lowest part that some people call a lizard brain or the croc brain, something like that. That's the limbic system. This lowest part of your brain is where all your emotions are housed. It's also where you make all of your decisions. Now, you might think, well, I thought long and hard about that decision, but the truth of the matter is you didn't. You made a decision based on emotion very, very quickly. But that long and hard part, that was you made a decision very quickly based on emotion, and you spent the rest of the time rationalizing and justifying that decision using the neocortex. That's why it felt like you thought long and hard about that decision. And so what's happening is we're making decisions very, very quickly in this part of our brain using as few calories as we can. And then if we have to, we'll rationalize or justify it up in that part of the brain. And so that's why it's it's vitally important that we communicate so clearly to our ideal clients just why we are the right choice for them, why we are the right fit for them, because they may not give us the time. They may not give us the calories to understand what we're talking about. And so anytime that we start out talking about ourselves. Again, if you say, I'm an architect, I've got to burn calories. I've got to turn on my neocortex, and I may not be willing to do that. I may still want to conserve calories and let that go right over my head, because what if? What if the saber-toothed tiger walks in while or after you told me all about your expertise and all about the number of projects like that you've done? So what's at stake here? What's at stake is that, number one, we're in 2020 and a lot of things have changed. What's at stake is that everything has changed for your clients, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in very large ways. Everything has changed. Think about if you design schools, right? If you design schools back in January, you may have been having a conversation with a school superintendent, and he or she said, we really need to expand our performing arts center so that we have more room and that we become more competitive as a school of the arts. But I will guarantee to you that here we are in September of 2020, after a global pandemic and social and political unrest all over the world, that expanding that performing arts center at the school is not that school superintendent's number one priority anymore. It's just not. Their number one priority is going to be something closer to, how do we keep our students healthy and safe? How do we get them back to school? How do we get back to some normalcy when it comes to teaching these students? And so what's happening is, with all of these things changing, there's a land grab in front of us. There's an opportunity at the same time. Every time there's a challenge, every time there's a crisis, there is opportunity. And there's opportunity for you to serve your client in new and better and unique ways. But if you start out going straight to their neocortex, if you start out talking about your expertise and what you think is important, you're going to lose those opportunities. You're going to be commoditized because they're going to shut that down. I'm not going to give you my neocortex. I'm not going to try to understand that. And you're going to miss out on that land grab. So the opportunity, what's at stake is that things have changed. Things are changing. If you ever felt like you're being commoditized, like you're being devalued or undervalued, it's only going to get worse as less and less opportunities are out there, less and less work is out there. The economy has crashed, and so there's less and less money out there to fund projects. If you feel like you've been commoditized, if you feel like you've been undervalued, that's only going to get worse. However, the opportunity is, if you can communicate clearly and communicate value clearly, you can be a part of that land grab. You can grab land that wasn't there before. You can grab land that someone else may have had a hold of before. And the lesson is that if you start from ego, if you start from a point of ego, we're experts in this. We've done more of this. This is what we do. This is why you need to hire us, because our expertise is this, and we've been in business this long, and we have done this many schools like this before. When you start out from a point of ego, almost always what you're doing is you're asking that audience, again, website, proposal, shortlist interview, whatever the situation, whatever the context is, you're asking that audience to fire up their neocortex, burn more calories than they want to, and understand what you're talking about on that high-level thinking plane. So when you start from a point of ego, you're starting out in direct conflict with their brain. You're asking them to do something that neuroscience, human psychology does not want them to do. You're asking them to do things that their brain is wired not to want to do. And they're going to shut you down. They may say, you know what? I'm not going to burn the calories to understand it. I'm going to let that go right over my head. You know what? You sound just like that other architect that came in here and said they had 564 combined years of experience, or they did 75 schools like this. I'm going to shut you down. I don't want to hear anymore. You just sound just like everybody else. And you look like everybody else. And when you look the same and you sound the same and you act the same as everyone else, judged through the eyes of your ideal client, of your prospect, of your audience, then you are, in fact, to them through those eyes, you are, in fact, a commodity. However, if you start from a point of empathy, hey, I realize that a lot of things have changed for you. I realize that while you were worried back in January about this performing arts area, what really matters right now is the health and safety of your students. I realize that you've got to figure out new ways to educate kids in a hybrid situation, in a remote situation, somehow bringing them back to school. You've got to figure out the path back to normalcy in education. So why don't we start by talking about that? When you start out talking about what matters most to them, understanding their feelings, understand what their biggest problems are, how you can solve those problems for them, and the results that they really, really value. When you start out from a point of empathy, you start out in alignment with their brain. And that is the unique opportunity that's in front of you right now. You can start from a point of empathy and grab land. You can start from a point of empathy and do things for your clients and be seen as more valuable to those clients than you've ever been seen before. But if you start from a point of ego, you're in more danger now than ever before to be discounted, to be commoditized, and to be devalued. And that is simply based on where we are, everything that's gone on around us, neuroscience and human psychology, all of those things combine in a perfect storm right now to work against you. But you do have the opportunity, if you start from a point of empathy, to conquer that, to grab that land, and to be seen as that trusted advisor, to be seen as, oh my gosh, they feel like the right firm for us because they understand us so well. There is no way to get to that point. If you've ever heard, well, this other firm felt like the right fit, there's no way to get to that point if you start from a point of ego, because you're going to get shut down. If you start from a point of empathy, it's a shortcut to that point. And that's the big takeaway. That's the big takeaway. If you start from a point of empathy, it is a shortcut to feeling like the firm that is the right fit to solve my problems, to take care of my needs. And so that's that, like it says on the screen, that's the technical end of this presentation today. This has been Ego versus Empathy, how the stories you tell are making you a commodity. And I'm happy to take all of your questions in the chat box right now. And if we don't get to any of your questions, I'm going to put my contact information up here on the slide here in a minute. If we aren't able to get to your questions, because I know we run out of time and I know I took a long time to get there, my promise to you is that I'll find a way to answer all of those questions and get those answers to you. So don't worry about that, even if we're not able to get to all of your questions today. And here's my contact information. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. My website is there, and also my email address. So reach out to me. I'm happy to continue this conversation and hopefully help you understand more about how to start from a point of empathy and really change the way that you do business by starting from that point of empathy so your clients and your employees see value instead of commodity. So thanks, everybody.